Hey, hello, it's time for a quick review of the summer. Peter, here in Fieldhouse Library. And so for this review of the summer, for those of you who remember, go through, for a quick review of the summer, I go through either a movie, song, something that I was experienced with over the summer. And I realize we're through the summer now, we're almost through fall. But I wanted to get back and go and share with some of the things that, this past summer, get together a couple of new episodes for you guys. So as you can kind of see, sitting in the library, we talk about a specific comic book series here today. And in specific, in conjunction with that, a specific type of comic book. If you've watched this channel at all, you know I really like comics. It's an art medium that I really enjoy. And there is a subsection of that genre which generally doesn't do very well. And that is Christian comic books for multiple reasons. But for me to explain that, let me start with kind of some of my views of comic books and what actually makes them good. In my mind, one of the critical things that a comic book has to have is good art. Why? Because if I just wanted to read a story, I would read a book. Or if I just wanted to watch a story, i.e. purely visual, I would watch a TV or a movie, program. Comic books are unique in that they kind of, as an art form, blend both of those in together, where story is important, art is important, or the artwork is important, and it blends into a way which really doesn't translate well into either of those two other genres, as we have seen in even in film, which a lot of people erroneously think that that's an easy transition over, particularly in the wake of Marvel having done it well so many times. But what you see behind the scenes is how much has to get changed for that to happen, and how much you're building off of not explaining certain things because you're just assuming people know them, which is why, for example, things like the movie The Watchmen, it was almost a frame-for-frame reconstruction of that comic book, and it didn't work real well because, frankly, you can't do that with a comic book. But that would get us down a whole different straight of issues that I want to talk about. Specifically, what we're going to be talking about today, though, is one specific comic book series that I purchased over the summer and read, and it's a Christian comic book series, which I know instantly raises some flags for some people because of things like this. Get this down here. And I apologize if anybody connected with this program, connected with this project is watching this. But this is Armor Quest. Armor Quest displays a lot of the problems that I have with Christian comic books. Here, you probably can't see this right here. It's not good art. And frankly, it's similar to like a Frank Miller style, like the Sin Cities and things like that, where it has that feel to it, but it's not as well executed. And frankly, I don't even really like it in those instances. I'm not a huge fan of those series. I don't like the blocky black and white art like that. And it has to be done really well if you're going to go that route. The problem is that a lot of Christian publishers, and no offense to, not actually, I think it was Lightpost that did this, but they don't have the experience with what it takes to make a comic book. And again, I should probably do a whole video just on comics, or at least my take on comics. I don't claim to be an expert on them. But like how the page is laid out, how the text box have to work in conjunction with the panels, and things like that. There's an art to that. And when you have less experienced artists, and you have less experienced, not just artists, but people putting the pages together, you run up with a mess. And that's what that is. It's just, and when it's not pretty to look at, you don't read a comic book for the quality of the writing. Now, should there be good writing in a comic book? Yes, but it's not fundamentally why you're reading it. If you, like I said before, if you want a well-written story, you should read a book. They're better written. But that doesn't, doesn't negate the fact that writing is important, but on one level, writing, no matter how good it is not going to make up for bad art in a comic book, because that's a central part of the medium. And if you can't grasp that, if you're like, oh, well, I have a good story, decent art will get me through, okay, you're already setting yourself up for failure, because you're already not understanding a good, at least 50%, if not more, of what your genre entails. But, just so everyone knows for this review, that wasn't the book that I bought this summer, because I wouldn't have bought it. I would have flipped through it. I got that for free because I bought Hand of the Morning Star, which is available in a 2-volume set. The publisher is Lamppost Publishing. And this project has Mike Miller as its main art director, which is why I was talking about art earlier. Now, if you don't know that name, then you probably don't read a lot of DC comics. His most recognizable recent work would be in the Injustice series, which is good art. I mean, I always enjoyed it. And actually, when I was walking up, I bought this at the convention. The Chia convention is where I found it. And I was walking, I was talking with the guy from Lamppost Publishing, and then I saw this book sitting on the table. I was like, that cover art looks like, and I picked it up. I was like, is this Miller? And he was like, yeah. And apparently he knows him, and he was the main art director for the entire first volume. He's the main artist. For the second volume, he's the lead art director, and he handed off the project to one of his proteges, which was fine. The art did take a bit of it. I hesitate to say that. This is not a huge hit, but you could tell it took a bit of a hit. But the art style is still really good throughout all 2 volumes. So when I saw that, I was like, well, I'm going to buy it. I actually don't even care anything beyond that. I just feel like I should support a series that has good art like that. And here, just as a quick contrast, let's look. As contrasted to that one I showed you earlier, I mean, just even during a heavy action sequence, look at how much cleaner and crisper everything is. And this is top grade quality in the art. It's not full color. There are cover arts in it which are color, but the issues themselves are not. But definitely high end for the art, and the story's pretty good too. So I've already wrecked my review because you know that I love it. As always, I kind of, in these quick reviews, try to give a brief up front that's just really quick, and then I'll get into more spoiler territory, and I'm assuming fewer people have probably read this, so that'll be potent. I'll let you know when they're coming. But the quick overall, the philosophy behind Hand of the Morning Star, and this is really what drew me to this, even when I was looking through it and talking with the editor, was a lot of times in Christian art, and this is another reason why Christians don't do well in the field of comics. Christian art tends to do one of 2 things, in my mind. It either becomes very, 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 very allegorical, which I don't think is bad. I mean, a lot of times some people will bash that and say, well, that movie was too preachy or this, that. That's not really a problem. I mean, look at movies that are popular and good and critically acclaimed, and you'll see a lot of them are very preachy. I mean, it's not like they're hiding a message. I mean, it's big, it's in your face, it's generally there, not all the time, but a lot of times. Like, that itself doesn't have to be a problem. The problem is with comics is that they generally don't function well in allegory, that strong of an allegory. And that's not just a Christian statement. That's, for instance, I should have brought it over here. It's right on my counter, or my shelf over there. I have the book Class War. It's a comic book. And it's very heavy-handed politically. And it doesn't work, ultimately. The art in it is actually pretty good, which is why I own it. But it's just... it's too heavy-handed and it doesn't work, because that doesn't work in comics. At least I don't feel like it generally does. I have yet to read one that was really pushy. Maybe The Watchmen might be an exception. But even that's not really allegorical, not in that true sense of the word, like almost Bunyan-esque. The other thing that can happen in Christian art is the opposite extreme of that, where, to put forth two good examples instead of the bad ones, because I do think we tend to harp too much on Christian art sometimes and unfairly judge it. C.S. Lewis, his works are clearly, Aslan, clearly a Christological figure, where it's very, very much, better yet, Pilgrim's Progress. Because Pilgrim's Progress is undeniably a good book. It's translated into more languages than any other book other than the Bible. At least that fact used to be true. I assume it still is. And on the other end of the spectrum, though, I think you have something like The Lord of the Rings, which isn't Christian in any true sense of the word, but a lot of Christians feel okay reading it because it's like, well, the author was a Christian, and the world itself is like based on this Christian ethos and et cetera, et cetera. So those are generally the two, I think you don't see a lot of Christian art that kind of falls into a middle ground there. But this does a pretty good job of doing it. Hand in the Morning Star. Sorry, I derailed a little bit to get to this point, which is the setting is, imagine an X-Men type story where Christianity is true. Now, if you're a Christian, as I am, this makes the series almost even more believable, because it's like, yeah, if you're a non-Christian watching this, I hope there are some out there. I hope I'm not mono-audienced. If you want to know what Christians sound like when they're talking to each other when you're not around, and it's just Christians talking to each other and how they pray and when they pray and why they pray and stuff, this book does a great job of actually illustrating that the people who are in it, the Christians, the characters in it who are Christians, act in a very actual Christian way, which one should be quick to emphasize doesn't mean they're perfect and doesn't mean they agree with each other even. But it's very good from that sense and from that perspective. So just from that point alone of kind of a portrayal of Christianity within a unique world where there are super powered individuals who, key to point out, just in case you're turned off by that concept, they did not replace the word mutation from an X-Men story with the word, gift or spiritual power or prophecy or something. No, that's not actually the case. There are superpowered individuals. I'll explain a little bit more about that when I get into the spoiler section. But basically, just except for now, they're superpowered individuals that doesn't stem from some kind of faith in themselves or faith in God or anything like that. It's just super, and some of whom are Christians, and it's actually really good from that sense. So, quick note on it. Would I suggest you read it and buy it? Yes. If you're a Christian, definitely. If you're a Christian who likes comic books, there's no excuse for it not to be in your library. It's phenomenal. If you are a non-Christian who likes really well-produced comic books, I suggest, particularly from a more of an indie standpoint, it's definitely worth looking at. The story is compelling, and the characters are compelling. And then, like I said, you get an added bonus of kind of a fun picture of how Christians actually interact with each other. Okay, so definitely suggest buying it. These, just for our, that side of it, these books, this is a 2-volume set. It's a closed canon. So the story's done. It's left open for a possible spin-off series at the end of the 2nd volume. But the story arc itself closes nicely. I had heard each volume is composed of 4 volumes. And when I was talking with the guy, he said they're going to bring out 2 things. He wants to re-bring out each of the 4 volumes individually, so 8 total volumes, to get more cover art out there, and you can make more money that way. And they're also going to bring out I believe, full color, full 1 volume. Now, I might pick that up just for collector's purposes. Obviously, I mean, the book's going to probably have to be at that point about this thick. I don't necessarily like reading a story like that. I mean, I have several Spider-Man collectors that are big bundles like that, but obviously you want the small ones to read. It's much more manageable. This is another series you should be reading. But anyway, all right. So that sets that. Kind of get us into a spoiler section right now, and I'll stay soft on them, so no huge surprise giveaways. But basically, so here's the deal. Hand of the Morning Star. You have a superpowered being known as the Morning Star who shows up, who basically is able to imbue superpowers. He does it to 5 individuals who are the 5 fingers of the hand. So that's one faction. You have like the Morning Star and his 5 dudes. That's kind of one faction. You have the United States government with its development of more exoskeleton troops and things like that. So you kind of got that going on. And there's other people floating around. The most important of which is this gentleman back here, who is a supervillain, Tempest, who is hilarious, very well written character, who's a eco-terrorist. And he's hilarious because he sucks at being a villain, and in a way that doesn't detract. Like, it's not humorous detraction from the story. It's actually humor adding to the story. But like, he tries to stop a logging company, and will end up accidentally causing a fire that burns down a forest or something. He's just really bad at what he does, but you can kind of tell. There's even discussion amongst the characters that, like, is his heart in the right place? Maybe we can, and they're kind of like, maybe we can bring this guy into the fold, train him, and send him in the right direction, bring him into the hand. This character, Tempest, ends up, and this isn't really a spoiler because it happens pretty soon, actually, into Volume 1. Like, it's the second volume the second issue of the Volume 1. While attempting to stop an oil drilling station, and so he basically ends up almost dying. In fact, he's presumed dead by almost everybody, and he is discovered as he washes up on the shore by a missionary who kind of nurses him back to health, shares the gospel with him. This is, like I said, this is where it's interesting to have the dynamic of Christianity within the storyline, because Tempest converts to Christianity, and you then get some interesting questions start to grow from that. What would you do with that? You now have this superpowered individual who was undeniably a supervillain who converts to Christianity, and his new, how do people accept him? What does he do now? How does all that play into it? And on one level, that itself is a strong part. It gets us into some of the interesting and some critiques that I do have of the series. Okay. So the good parts that kind of stem from that is, like I said, you have an interesting portrayal of Christianity and Christian interaction. You have some negatives, and you also have some positives where, for example, it doesn't take that traditional kind of flag-waving Christian evangelical where he's still actually a hippie even after he becomes a Christian. And he's all about, well, I still need to use my powers to try and help bring awareness to environmental issues, and he's still an environmentalist, which is interesting because he's a type of Christian that maybe a lot of Christians who might even read this book aren't. So that makes for an interesting twist, and he's definitely not the same as some of the other Christians who are in this, so you have debates on that level. The series as a whole and the tone is, this is my criticism, a little bit more pro-American America than than I personally am, or that I think Christianity, that it might have been wise to do in a book like this. It would have been, I think, a little bit more interesting. And they might do this in subsequent, like I said, it was left open for potential future editions. It'd be interesting to see a Hand of the Morning Star where you have superpowered Christians at a time when America isn't, this Christian nation, land of, the president is a Christian in this one, and pretty clearly, I think, supposed to be George Bush. He looks like George Bush when you read it. But anyway, so that I think would be interesting, and that's not an area they chose to go, which on one level is fine from a story point standpoint, because you already have a lot of threads going on, particularly for a short closed canon series. Like I said, you have a lot of threads going on that you're trying to tie up. You maybe don't want to bring in too many. But from a realistic world standpoint, it made certain things feel a little trite. Other positive that kind of stems from all this, the powers, how people get their powers, why they have powers, etc., is interesting. And by the end of the series, all your questions on it are pretty substantially answered. I like how Michael says, and it's even fine, Michael is Tempest's real name, I should say. So Tempest, who is the villain who converts, says at one point when he's talking to somebody, they're like, where did your powers come from? He said there's a complicated answer and short answer. The short answer is, I believe I was given them, by God for a specific reason. And we'll leave it at that for now. And I think the fun part of that is that it's not just that, like I said, it's not my faith in God gives me power and, I'm Bible man or something like that. It was really, no, there's a scientific answer. And like I said, it is given in, not real in depth, but enough of it in the book that you can kind of glean it out. And particularly like also for the Morning Stars, the other superpowered individuals you primarily learn about. And as you, like I said, so there is a scientific, like a hard aspect, but then also, and again, like I said, a good example of Christianity and how we kind of really talk. It's like, yeah, there's reasons why I was, I got this money or, something like that. But ultimately, I know it comes from God, no matter the earthly means that I got it by, and so I have a responsibility to do X with it. That's clearly in there. So again, like I said, if you want to know, if you're a non-Christian, you want to know how Christians talk and why they do, it's actually a fairly good series for that. Flip side of that, negative, and I guess this is realistic in one sense, and the book does have a very real-world feel to it. But like limitations on the powers and full scope of powers, it's not very clearly delineated. And I know there's always wiggle room in that. I got the Runaways right here. So Runaways, what the limitations on Molly's powers are. You kind of know the upper limits of her strength because you've seen it happen. You kind of know, well, no, she can't fly. That's not something she does. Her power is never going to let her do that. It's just not her mutation. They never do a really, particularly for more of the secondary characters, they never do a great job of hammering down what exactly it is they do. And so I don't know if I'm supposed to be surprised when all of a sudden some guy jumps up and does something that's even more awesome. And you're like, yeah, that looked cool. But I don't know if that's something he can normally do or if he dug down and really went beyond what he was capable of. So that would be a slight negative. And I spent all this time talking about the art and maybe downplaying writing, which I shouldn't have, because that's definitely a writing aspect that needs to come in and would have made it a little bit better. Second thing I didn't like, and this is big spoiler, so if you read it now, then come back and listen to this last 30 seconds I'm going to give you. The ending, on one level, aggravated me. And that's because, remember I said, so this book was not allegorical, and then all of a sudden at the very end, you're like, there's enough stuff in here that's obviously alluding to certain things of Revelation that's supposed to kind of, oh yeah, Revelation. But then they don't go there. It's if you're going to set it up, where I got lost as to what were you trying to do. For example, the exoskeleton suits that the U.S. government starts making, and then that a certain terrorist organization gets a hold of and starts producing and using, are called locusts. Clearly an allusion to the book of Revelations, where it's talking about the army of the locusts coming forth and this, that, and the other. Morningstar himself is on one level kind of intonated, like there's times you're like, oh, is this supposed to be the Antichrist? And then even at the end, again, since we're doing spoilers, let's go ahead and look at the art. Here you go. He's clearly has the form of a devil, but he's not. Like later when you get through the book, you're like, oh, he's actually either an extraterrestrial or extra dimensional being is heavily implied. He's not actually a spiritual being. And in the end, he clearly isn't the Antichrist. So, there's that. So I guess there were points where I was like, I'm not 100% sure what you were trying to do there. And maybe it was to keep someone like me who knows the Bible. This could be read by a non-Christian and enjoyed, but it's clearly mostly going to be read by Christians. And maybe that was in there to kind of like tease a LaHaye sort of thing at you, but then not give it to you because we've got our own twist we want to do, which is great, and I applaud that. But I almost, sometimes it was confusing as to, well, but then why are you making certain things where now it's going to appear really weird when that maybe happens in later books if you want to go there. But that was a small quibble over what was a relatively long series as compared to that amount of space. So, Hand of the Morning Star, definitely encourage everyone to read it. And maybe you're one of those people who has read it. And if so, I would like to hear your thoughts on it. I loved it. I loved this series. I would like to get my copy signed. But, comics aren't for everyone. And this type of comic might not be for everyone. So that's pretty much it for this review of the summer. I'm going to try to have another one up soon where we will discuss mediocre films. And if you picked up on that, all right.